Okay, time is precious, so I'm going to start. People will join us. So, hello everyone. Um, my name is Pascal Fabier. I'm French. I happen to be the lead person behind this community of practice you're a member of, and within the community, I moderate a thematic stream on sustainable landscape and jurisdiction. Uh, when the pandemic is keeping us apart like we are now, and with the pressure of the year finishing, I feel it's very good to see your face, and we appreciate the time you're giving us today. So I hope that all of you are well and will stay healthy as the year closes, and I welcome all of you to this workshop, and thank you for the attention for the next 90 minutes. Today, our workshop will give an overview of the finding of a report that was produced by the Green Commodities Program of UNDP, but also the Climate and Forest team of UNDP in partnership with GIZ, which took a very active role in shaping this work. And the report is called Four-Dimensional Systemic Change, alignment and connectivity in reducing deforestation. Before we go into the meat of this, I just wanted to share with you why this report. The genesis of the report comes from our simple observation that many initiatives and many actors involving are working hard towards sustainable commodities do so in silos and are rarely collaborating enough to leverage the opportunity that they are there for changing. So this observation we had is equally true to global, national, or local level actors and initiatives. So we prepared this report. It took about a year and a half to come to where it is now, to understand better the problem and to look at a solution to address them. So, Alexandra, if you could put the first slide, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, thanks a lot. So now let me check. I will just ask if you can open your camera for those of you who haven't done it, so we can see each other, and stay on mute while you're not speaking. And the chat function, we want to use it as much as possible to share any reflection you have or any question you may have during any moment of the presentation. So do not hold back, put your questions there, and we will moderate and try to address your question during the session or in the future. We are a very manageable number of people here. We've organized this workshop in two groups, one for Asia and one for Latin America. And so I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to introduce yourself with your function and name in the chat box. So, and we can all look at what's coming, so we discover who we are, and that would be good. So please go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat box. Okay, Andreas. Hi, Julian and Selma. Okay. Boy team, nice. Avery, yeah, okay. All right, finish your introduction and we will keep watching them. Babasola, welcome. Alexandra. Okay, so essentially, while you're introducing yourself, our objective today is to share this the finding of this report that we produce, which we think is pretty important and has received the input of many stakeholders outside UNDP, and to start a conversation to see how we can apply the findings of this report to the work at global, national, and subnational level. The challenge we face as a team is that the content of this report is extremely rich. And it has been designed to apply to different environments, different commodities, different level of jurisdiction. So it's vast. And it's so rich that it is a challenge to share its content in a 90 minutes thing. So we're going to cover a number of topics, and some of you will find some topics more interesting than others. And we hope that to organize some deeper dive on the content of this report in 2021. For that matter, at the end of this workshop, we will run a poll, a digital poll here, where we will ask you which dimension of the 4 dimensions you would be interested to find out more. And that will give us some indication about where to put some more energy into this in 2021. Okay, so at the end of it, we will run a poll. The team that worked on that did a great job interviewing and connecting and talking to a lot of people. And the key researcher and authors are with us here, and they are Yasmin, who is there, Yasmin Paul, and Julian Lambin, who work for Kite. And I'm going to ask to hand over to you, Yasmin, and to Julian to introduce yourself before you take us through the process and the agenda. So over to you. Welcome. Stay tuned and keep your cams on. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Jasmine.
Thanks, Pascal. So Alex, if you can take us to the next slide, we'll just go through this. We'll just run through the agenda very quickly. To introduce myself, I'm a consultant at Kite Insights. My background and interests are in geography, environmental policy and development, and interest in this topic area came from spending many years working with indigenous communities in the Peruvian Amazon. Over to you, Julian.
Thanks, Yasmin. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here this morning and to be able to speak about this report. As I said, my name is Julian. I'm a senior consultant at Kite Insights. We focus really on helping organizations to conduct research and articulate the rationale and calls to action behind their work, and working in the sustainability space more broadly, including commodities for many years. And yeah, it was a pleasure working with Pascal and the team on this report. Today, we've done our welcome and introductions. Yasmin and I will briefly run you through the key findings and recommendations of the report. And then we'll have some breakout discussions to dive into more details of the report. And we've asked some of you who are attending to share some examples to kick us off, which we're looking forward to. But for the moment, I think I'll hand back over to Yasmin.
Thanks, Julian. So yeah, it's great to meet you all today, and thanks for joining us. So before we start with the more complex stuff, I'd like us all just to take a moment to reset and to ground ourselves, so we can step away from the other things that might be distracting us today, forget about any other meetings or any deadlines that we might have. So if I can ask you to close your eyes for a moment and take a deep breath. So take a deep breath and imagine that you're in a forest, your favorite forest anywhere in the world. Look at the patterns of light and shade through the trees around you, the colors of the leaves or the branches, depending what the season is. Feel the air on your skin, the freshness or the temperature and the humidity. Listen to all of the sounds around you, a chorus of insects or of birds. Maybe you can hear the sound of running water, or maybe just the sound of the wind blowing through the canopy of leaves above. Take another deep breath and smell the freshness, the scent of the resins, or the pungency of the decaying leaves beneath your feet. Imagine all of the myriad of creatures and organisms that live and thrive here. All of the people that benefit from the forest's resources. Think of the cycles of nutrients, of water, of atmosphere that rely on and maintain the continuity and balance of this ecosystem. And as you open your eyes and return to the room, I'd like you to keep that forest with you for the rest of our conversation. So that's a reminder of why we're here today. So I'll now hand over to Julian, who will introduce the research that's informed this new report.
Thanks, Yasmin. That was lovely. It's a nice way to, well, for us, start the day, and for others to start this. Alexander, if we could have the next slide, that would be great. So really, the background to this research is really the context that we're all operating in as we seek to build a sustainable commodities system globally. And as Pascal noted, it's that there have been numerous innovations in technology, in standards, in formats of intervention and partnership, and increases in the amount of finance being directed towards sustainable commodities. And yet, despite all this, in many areas, deforestation is continuing to rise, and this is presenting an enormous challenge to global climate change and to global sustainable development ambitions. Rather than focusing on the specific design of interventions or policies, what we really set out to understand was how addressing disconnects between levels of action, for example, between subnational, national and international scale initiatives and between actors at those different scales, could help to address the challenges that are being faced at each level and bring us closer to the kinds of systemic change in commodities production that we know in the end needs to happen. And through doing that, looking at ways that stronger alignment and connections can move us towards that system. So we looked at research from all sorts of stakeholders, from academia, from government, civil society, and other experts, and as Pascal mentioned, conducted interviews with practitioners really across the whole commodities system to understand what role those alignment and connections could play. We did this in two stages. First, to identify what we call the connectivity gaps, which inform the four main dimensions of the report that we're speaking about today. These are, in effect, the high-level kind of tensions or challenges that are faced by actors in the commodities system, ambitions that have not yet been realized. And secondly, we spoke again with an even wider group of practitioners, really to gather recommendations and practical examples of how these gaps are being addressed today or how they might be in future. And the result is this report, which highlights just really some of the opportunities I think that could be realized if we take these steps to promote synergistic alignment as we go about our work. And for each of these four dimensions, we promote high-level recommendations that could address those challenges. They really highlight opportunities for a more connected and mutually reinforcing network of action to realize and fulfill the ambitions of actors operating at each of these levels at the moment, perhaps in too siloed a manner or too independently. Different dimensions may resonate with different people more according to your place, and the recommendations, as noted, remain high level as they're for the moment agnostic to a specific country context or commodity. The ambition of the UNDP, and indeed for this session specifically, is that we can use these high-level recommendations as a guide for conversations and thinking about systems change in commodities, and through that translate them into concrete action to your specific context and to your specific experience. I'll pass over to Yasmin to talk us through the next slide and expand a little bit on this concept of alignment, which you'll hear us speak about a lot.
Thanks, Julian. So an important starting point to recognise is that we see the diversity of actors and different approaches promoting sustainable commodities as a strength of this system, not a weakness. We know, for example, that jurisdictional and landscape approaches are showing real promise in addressing localised drivers of deforestation in places. And at the same time, there are some enabling or regulatory actions that can only be taken by national governments. We also know that international standards and frameworks are critical to create consensus in the private sector, for example, and to build the global market for sustainable commodities. So the report really looks at how to create alignment between these different groups and what we're calling levels of action in a way that harnesses the strengths of this diversity and decentralization, and we hope creates reinforcing positive impacts. So you'll hear us talking about alignment a lot during the course of this workshop. So when we're talking about alignment, we're really talking about three things. The first of these is cooperation, which we understand as deliberate relations of collaboration between distinct actors. So, for example, between commodity producers, private sector buyers, between local or national governments. The second of these is coordination. So if we think about this, where these distinct actors are adjusting their policies or their practices to reduce any contradictions, to align on mutual benefits, and hopefully to improve outcomes. So the last aspect of alignment is integration, which is more involved. So this is where the boundaries between these different groups of actors are crossed. So they're working together more closely. It can give space to joint decision making and serves to really address some cross-cutting issues. So this alignment can occur both vertically, and vertical alignment we understand as connections with initiatives or actors operating at higher or lower levels from each other in the system. And this alignment can also occur horizontally, and that's with initiatives or actors operating at the same level, so in the same geographic or political level, which might be, for example, working in the same landscape or the same jurisdiction or in the same sector. So each of the four dimensions of systemic change in the report title. So each of the four dimensions we'll now propose some practical steps that can be taken to promote synergistic alignment. And synergistic alignment is what we're calling it when there's strong alignment both vertically and horizontally. And we see this as really key to drive systems level change. So does anyone have any questions or comments before we move on to look at each of these four dimensions in turn? Over to you, Julian, if not, and feel free to post comments in the chat if you prefer. Thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if anyone has any clarifications or points to make as we're going through these, please do just post them in the chat, and if it's appropriate, we'll try and address them as we go through. In the meantime, I'll introduce the first of the four dimensions, which we've called increasing cohesion between levels of governance and action. This really looks at challenges that emerge in the absence of vertical alignment, which Yasmin just spoke about, and what actions different actors can take to improve this. So what we heard when we were speaking to practitioners is that whilst there's many fantastic initiatives, occurring at each level of action, they're often disconnected, and particularly between national and subnational levels. And one consequence of this is that we see often islands of good practice in certain areas, whilst the overall standard of sustainable production in a country or wider region remains low, and that's illustrated by this graphic by ProForest here. At other times, it's difficult to draw attention to successes and good practices occurring at a subnational level in particular that could potentially inform and improve national level standards and practices. And further still, at times, standards being applied in one area or at one scale in a country may be misaligned with those being promoted at another, and therefore create overlapping and onerous demands on farmers and producers, which is exacerbated by a lack of knowledge exchange. So we make a variety of recommendations here, and the first of those is to establish more cascading platforms that connect these separate levels of governance. And here what we're really calling for is convening spaces and formalized platforms that enable knowledge sharing and interaction between these different levels. And the Foxby National Commodities Platform for sustainable palm oil in Indonesia which I'm sure many of you know about, is really an excellent example of creating these stronger linkages, and something we'll come back to later. Our second recommendation, and is related to the first, is also to make, oh, sorry, Alexandra, if you could go back to the previous slide. So our second recommendation in this slide is to make jurisdictional approaches a key thematic area in national platforms. So right now, there just isn't enough connection between these groups. There was a report released last week by the Climate Group, for example, that showed that of the states and regions that they spoke with, only 21% had been formally consulted as part of their national climate action plans. And so raising awareness of action occurring at a subnational level, and importantly, in the other direction, initiating discussions more about how national actors can improve the enabling environment for others that are promoting sustainability, is something that we can be much more of a feature at the national level. Finally, and just as importantly, we highlight the importance of creating better conditions for bottom-up transfers of innovation from subnational initiatives. This recommendation is obviously going to be in part realized by the other recommendations we've made in this section, but we also think this is somewhere where there's more research likely needed to better categorize and understand, what conditions determine the spread of good practice from, say, a subnational pilot scale to higher scales, so that these conditions can be more consistently and proactively incorporated into the design of programs. The overall kind of key recommendation or outcome of these recommendations is really to create conditions where initiatives at different levels are better aligned and aware of one another's actions. And this vertical alignment is important because it creates those conditions where lessons and resources and data can more fully flow up and down and spread good practice and address blockers, reward success as a result. Yasmin, over to you.
So when I talk about dimension 2 of the 4 dimensions, so next slide, please, Alex. Thank you. So the second dimension that we examine is focused on the other half of synergistic alignment, horizontal alignment. This really focuses on addressing disconnects between actors operating at the same political or geographic level. So we might understand a lack of horizontal alignment as characterized by diverging or contradictory methods, goals, definitions perhaps, or by competition between actors where there could be potential for collaboration. So competition might be competition for customers, for funding, or for public recognition of action. To address these horizontal challenges, the report highlights recommendations which create opportunities for alignment and exchange and seek to improve the quality and the outcomes of these interactions. Our first recommendation for this dimension is to increase knowledge sharing across groups of actors, and to do this by fostering platforms and incentives for horizontal cooperation and exchange. So, for example, the UNDP Climate and Forests team, with whom we also worked on this research, they support South-South exchanges between local communities of actors in a model that could potentially become much more commonplace. Our second recommendation for horizontal alignment is to do more. While we realise that this is happening already in many places, but it could happen more widely. So to do more to ensure that marginal stakeholder groups are fully able to participate in processes. So, for example, there's still a need to make more consistently create conditions for smallholders to gain access to certification programs, which can be costly, have high barriers to entry, access to markets and information in ways that also build trust between different stakeholder groups. Or there are opportunities for farmers or indigenous producers to share their own local environmental knowledge, the learnings or the best practices that they might have obtained with other practitioners within the same geographies. Our third recommendation in this area really stems from some of the strongly contrasting views we heard from different stakeholders while we were conducting the research. So while recognising that diverse views are important and there'll always be a need for them, at the same time we highlight the need to instigate cross-sectoral dialogue to more clearly articulate definitions of success. this is important to build a shared understanding around both achievable goals and ambitious commitments, to get an understanding of where people are, where they're positioned in relation to those, what they're actually seeking to achieve. It can help to attract more partners to support important conservation or sustainable development programs. What we see as most important here in this horizontal alignment dimension is really improving dialogue and engagement between actors operating at the same level of intervention or in the same place. So fostering these stronger connections in key areas in particular, such as definitions for best practices or desired outcomes, can really lower barriers of entry to groups like smallholders or the private sector or governments. And we see this as all being vital to success and supporting the spread of good practice. So next slide for the third dimension.
Thank you, Yasmin. So our third dimension looks at increasing government capacity for synergistic alignment and the challenges of this ambition that are currently faced. I think, again, as all of you will here already know, changes in subnational or national government can reverse political agreements, dismantle supportive environments, and derail action plans almost instantaneously. And further, even where commitment exists and continues, some national and subnational governments lack the internal capacity to create an enabling environment. That enabling environment includes control of land ownership and land use laws, data collection, monitoring, and also ensuring legal compliance and the rule of law for change. So here we highlight quite a diverse set of recommendations that can address these issues of continuity, of capacity, and also of quality partnerships with government. And the first of those recommendations is really to create an agreed and shared methodology for capacity building and support when working directly with government actors. Obviously, strengthening government capacity to community stakeholders is critical, and developing shared plans, delivering services. But the key rationale for this recommendation is really to ensure that we don't create further misalignment when multiple different actors are providing services or working with government actors to build that capacity. And this was obviously highlighted as a risk in the absence of this recommendation. I think we all know, as part of that, the importance of multi-stakeholder convening and the importance that has to building shared commitment and shared understanding. However, even more important than getting people together in a room together is actually cultivating an atmosphere and format of exchange in that room, or Zoom room today, that really builds trust and doesn't just tick a box. And so our second recommendation here, I think, is under-celebrated but really important, calls for the building of a bank of skilled facilitators and other stakeholders who can really support this kind of systemic oriented dialogue. And so understanding of systems level change amongst facilitators and organizations that convene the stakeholders in commodities is a critical component of that. Now, with these stronger conditions of government capacity in place, we also highlight the promise of some early efforts to create more independent platforms with more diverse ownership. So here, what we're talking about is really for mature commodities platforms which have met certain conditions, such as establishing broad buy-in, having a clearly articulated plan. But that from that point, they can look to potentially establish some level of independence from the governments that establish them. And this is this collaborative independence model, I suppose. A good example of this is the PCI Institute in Mato Grosso in Brazil, but it really could potentially offer a route towards addressing some of the political and resource-related challenges that I noted at the beginning. And so ultimately, this group of recommendations is quite varied, but it's really about increasing, firstly, the depth of exchange and collaboration and basing that in real trust that is possible between actors, and crucially, strengthening the capacity of governments in a consistent way. And from there, pointing towards ways that we can insulate and create greater certainty around the continuation of those commitments to sustainable commodities, whilst improving government's capacity to directly support ambitions. Yasmin, for our final recommendations.
Yeah, so next slide, perfect. Thanks, Julian. So the fourth and the final recommendation looks at what we see as a crucial element for systemic change in sustainable commodities production. So here we talk about integrating and diversifying flows of resources and incentives, for example, finance or technical support. So these resources can become more available by addressing the other three dimensions. But what's really essential is that they reach farmers and other practitioners whose actions on the ground and at landscape level are really pivotal to turn the tide to lasting sustainability. So we can see it's clear that in many places these incentives aren't getting there fast enough or at a big enough scale to make a difference. But during the course of the research, we realized that this is partly due to challenges in measuring and attributing success, but also because of disconnects between farmers who might be doing the right thing and then businesses or consumers who are unwilling to pay the extra prices for premium products. Crucially for this dimension, we highlight the need to develop criteria and systems to distribute incentives and resources to ground level specifically, as this is where we see they're most needed and not reaching. To identify priority areas that actually need these resources, we want to be able to account for ecological impacts of interventions, for the effectiveness of emissions reductions and the additionality of these interventions and the impacts that they're having. So examples such as tracking forest cover change through digital platforms, through MRV infrastructure, and importantly through ground level reporting can really help. Especially when these are combined, as this will provide critical information on where these resources are most needed. So for example, national government distribution of incentives or rewards-based payments could then be aligned with both ground level needs and international priorities and standards. So where sustainability efforts are succeeding, we also advocate for greater efforts to capture and communicate tangible success stories and best practices, not just to familiar stakeholders or groups that you might be working with more regularly, but to really the range of other communities who might be inspired by practices that they can see their peers being rewarded for or achieving success in. The final recommendation for this dimension is that we call for the development and implementation of more effective public-private partnerships. Acknowledging the various paces of political, of socioeconomic, and of ecological change, we're highlighting that agreements must be able to flex with these time cycles for partnership benefits to actually materialize and take root. So importantly, these partnerships must be designed and managed to ensure that all stakeholder groups benefit and not just some groups. So as we've mentioned, we can see that incentives are not yet reaching all the stakeholders or places that they truly need to reach to turn the tide towards sustainable production. So as I mentioned, complementary reporting systems and public-private partnerships can unblock, can redistribute, or even create entirely new flows of resources. We see better measurement systems and in parallel storytelling as being critical because of the role they can play in building much more widespread appetite for action, for change, and for rewarding positive progress.
Great. Thank you, Yasmin. So that is a very rapid and as Pascal noted, wide and rich report that has been put together. And so also appreciating this is high level. We'd love to take some questions on the report overall before moving on to our breakout sessions. If anyone has any questions or indeed comments, reactions, or observations on what they've just heard.
I have a question and a reaction for you, Yasmin and Julian, and for the group here. the recommendations and the issues they are addressing are high level on purpose, so that the report can be used as a tool to improve project design, to improve the design of ambitions, or to improve annual planning processes, to ensure that isolated and siloed approach to project implementations are addressed to connect with other. That's very clear. So the report doesn't look at any particular illustration except through the case studies that you've populated the report. So the report is full of case studies coming from Indonesia, from Paraguay, from many different jurisdictions. My question to you, Julian and Yasmin, is here we have a long, pretty sobering list of what I would call dysfunctional project design and implementation practices. Have you observed all of these in most projects, or do you see some of them in some project? How have you observed that in your interviews and case studies? Are they quite persistent and very often observed, or are they more isolated, meaning this project would have a problem of flow of resources and incentive, that one would have a problem of vertical alignment? We know that the SPO Indonesia is working hard towards integrating vertically with national and subnational, but there are a lot of other actors in Indonesia that are not integrated. So what is your experience of how those challenges have been our experience?
I can start, Yasmin, if you have reactions too, please do. I think there's probably some common themes that many actors will highlight that are less connected to themselves and more perhaps general kind of, if you speak to someone, some of their high level frustrations with efforts to promote sustainable commodities right now. And that is things like resources reaching the ground at the sufficient levels, or a lack of connections between, in particular, jurisdictional and landscape initiatives and national governments in many contexts. I think really what people bring up most often that they're individually struggling with, it depends on where they are in the system. And so part of the exercise we did for the report is categorizing the different types of actors as well as the different levels of action. And really what we were trying to, particularly when focusing on trying to get recommendations, we're focusing on things that people are actually doing. And so an important component of that is being able to speak to where you exist in the context of the wider system, and therefore where the connections that are closest to you are absent or that you could improve. And so those, I think, are more distinct and depend upon who you're talking about. But there's also, I think, some high level trends here that most people working in the space would be expect to find resonant. I don't know, Yasmin, if you have something to.
No, I think that covers most of it, and I fully agree. It's often a symptom of where the different actors are positioned in the system. I think whilst we were conducting this research, we tended to find that most stakeholders that we spoke to faced particular challenges relating to one of these dimensions, but then also had perhaps strengths relating to another of these dimensions. So, if it was like a jurisdictional or a national government, then maybe the governance aspect might be more relevant to them, but they might actually be demonstrating strong ability to gain resources, if not to distribute them, stronger or weaker horizontal or vertical alignment. So yeah, I think identifying both where these challenges occur, but then also recognizing where they might have strengths in some of these dimensions should be happening in parallel, really. You can then seek to reinforce the strengths and make up for it in the areas that are weaker.
Any other questions or comments before we jump into some breakout discussions? Okay. So now I think we'll jump into two breakout discussions for a little while to first of all hear some examples from some of our participants here who've kindly offered to serve as fire starters for us and share their experiences. We'll then come back to the main room and kind of reflect collectively on what we've heard. But I think we can now launch our breakout rooms, if that's okay, Alexandra.
Yes, just preparing them, and it's easier if I don't share the slide.
Sure, you can share the slide once we're in there.
And 20 minutes, yes?
Sure, yeah, let's start with that.
Taking us back together, Julian? Yasmin?
I think we have everyone back, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I hope that you enjoyed the session and the discussion that came out. Thank you, and particularly to Andreas, to Babasola, and for all of you really for sharing examples and kicking us off. Babasola, I know wasn't in your group, but spoke to you yesterday and it sounded like a really great example. And the same, Andreas. I think it's great real world manifestation of these recommendations. So thank you for that. As I mentioned, some of our colleagues have been taking notes from those conversations, and we'll be doing so from the second time we run this workshop with colleagues from Latin America. So we'll be able to share those visual summaries with you and share some examples from other parts of the world as well in a few weeks. So thank you for that. Love to just kind of hear a few reflections, and perhaps Yasmin, I can ask you to start us off summarizing a little bit of what you talked about, but then really want to kind of hear from everyone any thoughts that have been provoked, any action that you might take forward to your colleagues and say we should consider this based on what you've heard today. Yasmin, maybe you start us off with some reflections.
So yeah, it felt like our breakout went very quickly, but we had some really interesting insights revealed through Babasola's example, and I might ask him to just share a couple of key highlights from what he spoke about there, but it really spoke to all four of the dimensions of systemic change that we spoke about earlier, and we also had this kind of wonderful interaction with Mariana as well, putting her own work in the context of what Babasola is doing with IDH and the potential opportunities for collaboration, and then really strengthening alignment there. So maybe Babasola and Mariana, you can share some quick summaries of what you spoke about.
Yeah, they're already drafting a memorandum of understanding between IDH and UNDP. So let's show us the draft. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, cool. Yeah, so thanks very much. Yeah, I'll just quickly give a short summary. As I said earlier in my introduction, I'm Babasola. I'm the program manager for NISCOPS, which is the National Initiative for Sustainable Climate Smart Oil Palm Smallholders. And NISCOPS operates in about 6 countries, both for the producing countries and also for the markets. And NISCOPS is a collaboration between IDH and Solidaridad across the globe, because we operate in virtually all of the landscapes that also Solidaridad works in. NISCOPS came about as an initiative from the Dutch government to see how we can strengthen producing countries, their smallholder farmers, to be more sustainable and achieve climate smart agriculture. So when we talk of climate smart agriculture, we are talking about productivity and livelihoods. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is about climate adaptation, and the third pillar is about climate mitigation. And based on these 3 pillars, KPIs were defined for each of the countries to see how smallholder farmers across various jurisdictions can improve or achieve climate smart agriculture from this year as the implementation phase till 2023. So in short summary, it's encapsulates all of the 4 pillars that the first dimension talks about. But also, it's a good example to show how 2 organizations who can be seen as fierce competitors between each other can collaborate and work together based on a global, just as I think was Julian or Yasmin that defined it before, the global, then talking to national, then subnational, then jurisdiction, and then coming down to the farmers. So that's where we are operating from based on, Dutch government initiating a government-to-government initiative with the 3 different countries, and then seeing how we can translate their national policies into subnational, then into the jurisdiction, and then going down right to the farmers to see how we can improve, how they can achieve climate smart agriculture. So it was good to connect with Mariana, and I hope that, yes, I would pass on to my team in Indonesia, and we would be able to collaborate further with UNDP on this. Thanks very much for this good opportunity.
Thank you, Babasola. And you raised some really interesting points about key challenges relating to actual implementation and monitoring data collection on the ground and ensuring consistency between different jurisdictions and then also between different nations as well. So we found that really interesting. And then Mariana, you also spoke in relation to some of these opportunities for strengthening horizontal alignment as well in terms of collaboration between different provinces in Indonesia.
Great. Thanks, Yasmin. In our group, just a very quick summary, and Andreas and others, please do jump in as well if you'd like to. But yeah, we heard first of all about the Foxbee platform in Indonesia, and I think many of you are familiar with it, but obviously a huge achievement in terms of instigating vertical alignment downwards, starting at a national level with the National Action Plan on Sustainable Palm Oil, and also kind of horizontally across actors. But then we also, I think, spoke about more in terms of challenges or concerns, perhaps, about the continuing fragility of political agreements, and also, actually, interestingly, interactions between actors that create the opposite conditions of what we were talking about in our presentation, probably, Yasmin. So some differences between international actors and standards, perhaps, and national level interests. And when those are coming together or conflicting with one another in ways that are, in ways that they're creating, in fact, kind of closed offness towards the idea of, for example, sharing data or working more together. So I thought it really highlighted, in particular, the need for, putting people just in a room together is not going to do it, and in fact can create some more difficult outcomes at times. We really need to kind of skilled facilitation and clearly articulated objectives in terms of aligning on shared actions or shared definitions that give each other space whilst allowing for the different actors to still pursue their role in the system. So there's always going to be a role for naming and shaming style NGOs, but there's also an important need to let governments and the private sector and other NGOs work together to actually try and make something happen over a long time scale without fearing that they may be demonized for doing so. So I thought it was a really interesting discussion, and kind of other challenges highlighted in terms of still aligning standards and calls for action at different level, and really getting that translation of national level ambition all the way down to a specific region or area, and an instigating action there. Andreas or anyone else in the session, anything to add to those reflections?
No, you wrap up completely good, Julian. Maybe we would also like to reinstigate the inevitable challenge of high political influence, like Anselm just mentioned. So NEP-SPO is already, the National Action Plan for Sustainable Palm Oil already enacted by the president, but yet still during its implementation, several stakeholders, typically government stakeholders, still hold their political stance, which is to some extent interfere our common goal, so to speak, that the multi-stakeholder have already agreed upon the NEP-SPO. So it remains quite a challenge for us, even for the government himself, for the forum itself. So, yeah, I think that's a very huge highlight for this. Remains tough. Thank you.
Julian, may
Yes,
I
Hassan.
share a comment or some reflection there?
Yeah, by all means.
Do I have 2 minutes? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Just to say that it's been a long journey since we decided to look into these issues, talk to the stakeholders, and as part of this research, colleagues from Indonesia and elsewhere, we didn't meet much challenges. Nobody told us, "No, that's not true." There is a shared understanding that we are facing an issue that is common to everybody. There's no blame. There's no one to blame. It's also the way we work in development, in government, in private sector, pursuing our goals, being locked into our lock frames, and so on and so forth. But we have to learn our lesson better. We've been at it for many decades now, and we know that the amount of energy that our projects are putting to transform the systems is so small in relation to the dimension of the issue. And if we do not, us developmental professionals, collaborate better, we won't make a dent to the issue. So there are all sorts of very good reasons, political agendas. Governments have to collaborate better. Of course, private sector pre-competitive processes are important, of course, but we have no control of that, or not so much, but we have control over our own collaboration. And Rini, who is here and is not necessarily well, and I will speak for that. We organized a jurisdictional dialogue in West Kalimantan at the local level to talk about this issue, and it created great opportunities for collaboration. So we, development professionals, have no excuses for not collaborating with each other. Let's be that clear. We may be locked down in our project, lock frame. Our donor may continue supporting ourselves in siloed approach, but we've got to be smarter. And we need to start with ourselves. Collaborating better is important. In a jurisdictional dialogue that we organized in Colombia a few weeks ago in parallel with the Indonesian one, our two internal partners, GIZ and UNDP, had not collaborated before. Through the jurisdictional dialogue, they started collaborating, moving the needle, bringing their own stakeholders, and actually modeling a system change practice. That's where it starts. It starts with us having the courage to go beyond our lock frames and bring others to the table of conversation. So I'm so excited. For me, that takeaway here is Marina talking to Baba Sola. Please do follow up, because you guys are important actors. You bring you manage a lot of money to change the development landscape here, and this is your power to talk to each other and enact it at the national level. So I found that very exciting. This is brilliant. Rini, if you hear me and if you are able, share some thoughts about what happened in West Kalimantan. That's, for me, that's my plea. back to you, Julian, and
thank you, Pascal,
Yasmin.
for your reflections there. And yeah, it's that resonates obviously very strongly. And likewise, the interaction between Mariana and Babasola was quite poignant in terms of revealing the opportunities. And I especially loved as well, Babasola, how you talked about the importance of really channeling some of those incentives and ensuring they were getting distributed, and some of the current blockages that you talked about there, because I think that dimension 4 as well, that's really going to be critical in terms of ensuring more equitable outcomes and really like lasting positive impacts too. So, well, hopefully we'll get to hear in the future about what comes of your dialogue with Mariana.
Great.
Yes, indeed. Yes, I look forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you. No, absolutely, Pascal. I think you've summarized it extremely well, and it's really our ambition that this can create conversations like that and really create that call for action. I think it is the really vital step up from individually all of the very good things that are already happening, and the possibilities to combine those. And set, yeah, as you say, model the way forward for those other actors upon whom we perhaps have less direct control, but certainly can show a way forward. And if innovation is going to come from anywhere in the space, it should be professionals such as yourselves. So I think we're just about ready to close. If you go to the polling section, or if we can launch the poll, Alexandra, we'd love to just get your opinion on where we might focus some conversations next year in terms of the specific kind of dimensions of this report. That should come up for you shortly. And if you could give us your thoughts, or your vote rather, on where to look first and focus our attentions, that would be very helpful. But I want to emphasize again, our thanks to you for attending the session and for being willing to listen to us, but I think more importantly to contribute and share your own opinions and your own experiences. It's been very valuable for us. As I mentioned, we'll follow up with summaries of this content in the near future, and hope to continue the conversation with many of you.
Julian, is it possible for us to choose more than one option?
I can't say for sure. I don't believe so. But tell us now, and we'll take that into consideration. Add a +1.
Only one, huh, Alex?
Yeah, it's a one choice poll.
Damn, that's an incredible dilemma.
I think we'll cover them all eventually. But, Mariana, which would
you? Because I'm with number 2 and number 4.
Yeah. And how do you know you voted? Because I clicked 3 times on everything, and then I don't know. Alex,
I'm gonna end the polling now. I seven, 8 colleagues have. So.
Great. Well, we have a winner. Close. Maybe a few recounts just to check. But great. Pascal, anything you'd like to add before closing? I think we can give people a few minutes to grab a glass of water before their inevitable next Zoom call of our.
Yeah, I know. No, thanks. But just interesting, the result of the poll. I would have lost my bet if I had bet. It's very interesting. There is no doubt that the transformation process to working more systematically and in alignment also starts with the donor narrative. And aligning the resources is critical, and that the polling shows. And I think it's interesting that we do that, which means in our next workshop, if we cover that, we need to invite the donors to talk to the issue. And I think that's an exciting thing to do. So lesson taken, I think we'll note that and we'll take forward. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for staying late for some of you. And that's it. Over back to you to wrap us up, Julian, Yasmin. You did a great job as usual. Always nice to work with you.
Thank you so much, Pascal. And thank you, everyone. I think that's us for today. Again, thank you for your participation. Thank you for your interest. If there's any follow-up questions, suggestions, ideas, reactions, please do follow up with us by email. And thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, I echo that. Thank you, everyone. Great to meet you, and enjoy the rest of your days or evenings.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you, Alexandra, for helping us through this too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thank you.